Well, as I mentioned with Shane Jones, while our mainstream media were running around trying to talk up the Mexican standoff in Parliament for the last 24 hours, a major piece of news came out yesterday. The government, and Shane Jones said this has been through Cabinet, announced its new emissions targets to meet our obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement. A climate agreement that, for some strange reason, thinks it can... Well, and we don't even know what global warming really is now, that it can change the computer model that the grifting climate scientists use to be less than 1.5% increase in mean world temperature or something. It's all poppycock. But we've decided that, what are the targets? To find out, and I have to say, well done, Taxpayers Union, for highlighting this story, because in a time when we are trying to get our economy right, get out of recession, and Shane Jones wouldn't give me a figure this morning on what these obligations will cost us, but I know that the Taxpayers Union, James Ross from the Taxpayers Union joins us now, have been doing some work on this. James, welcome to the program. Can you first tell us, what is it the government decided we've got to do? What's the new targets for the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, absolutely. So the targets to 2030 were 50% reductions. The targets to 2035 are 55. Now that might not sound like a huge leap on the face of it, which is what they're frankly using for a bit of PR spin.
55% reduction from what point in time?
From 2005.
Okay, and do we have an accurate measure of what our carbon emissions were in 2005?
We do have a figure. I couldn't tell you what it is off the top of my head.
Okay.
But the fact of the matter is that we are absolutely nowhere near hitting what we already had as our 2030 targets. So although that 5% extra might not look like much on the face of it, the facts of the matter are we are going to have to look at reducing our emissions by about 5% year on year every year until 2030.
And if we don't, what does the Paris Agreement say? How do we get told off if we don't?
Well, we basically we have to buy carbon credits from overseas, which in effect is just taking money out of Kiwi taxpayers' pockets and shipping it abroad. The 2030 targets Treasury did some analysis on this, and it was looking like it would cost up to about $24 billion, which is about $12,000 per
billion,
household.
Not million.
Billion with a B.
Okay.
So $12,000 per household. Now, frankly, that could be another $20 billion for all we know. These numbers came out at 8 o'clock last night. We've got to run the analysis, but that's the sort of figures we're talking about.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a lot of school lunches.
Exactly, and we're getting an announcement on the Dunedin Hospital today. May or may not be fully funded, but the fact of the matter are we're being told we can't afford that project. For the money we're sending overseas already, without these extra commitments, we could buy 12 Dunedin hospitals.
And it is fair to say that without China, without the United States now, without India in the climate accord, we're just whistling Dixie, aren't we?
Well, this is fundamentally the point. New Zealand already has a world-beating system in what we call the emissions trading scheme. But when we're pumping this much money overseas, what's the point if the US and China and India and Russia and the big emitters aren't making the same sort of commitments we are? I mean, the US has pulled out entirely. Even the UK now is committed to building, a third runway on Heathrow. Facts of the matter are, we're sacrificing ourselves on this altar of good intentions, and it's costing Kiwi households. Frankly, it could be up to, tens of thousands of dollars each.
Yeah. Do you know what proportion of carbon in our atmosphere is man-made?
Off the top of my head, no, I couldn't tell you that.
It's tiny, it's minuscule. And carbon itself is a very small component of our atmosphere. I mean, the science on this is not settled. It really is like a cult, James.
Yeah, there's differences of opinions there. The Taxpayers Union's view is that we should be undertaking responsible measures to reduce our emissions. But frankly, what we're looking at here isn't even close to.
Well, you say that, James. I'm going to challenge you on that. Why?
I think it's New Zealand is an area where we are going to bear the brunt of some of these changes in the climate.
Are we?
Now,
what changes in the climate?
Well, with warming, I mean, we're going to see weather-related issues, but there's cost.
Well, we've always
to
had
those, and
weather-related
there's cost
issues, James. I'm actually going to sit here and say, no, I don't want you to go along with the crowd here. Sea levels haven't risen. The IPCC is itself hauling back its computer modelling predictions. Even it admits we might get to 2% by the end of the century in terms of global temperature rise. And there's still much scientific debate as to whether or not human activity has any impact on this.
Yeah, look, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a climate scientist, so I'm not going to try and argue the points because, frankly, I couldn't. But what I would say is that whatever we do, however we approach these problems or however we don't approach them, the facts of the matter are Kiwi households can't afford to be paying what they're being signed up to pay.
Yeah.
That at the end of the day, that's the simple point.
And what would happen if we pulled out? We said stuff. What would happen if we said stuff this for a game of soldiers? And Shane Jones has clearly indicated this morning that this is under consideration as a policy by the New Zealand First Caucus.
Well, we'd get a bit of bad PR internationally. You might get the odd,
what, The Guardian would write something nasty about us? Oh, dear.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, treaties are only as strong as the enforcement, and with the big players not committing to the treaties already, with the US pulling out, it's something to be considered, I would say.
What, just abandoning the Paris Agreement?
Or at the very, very least, pulling back to targets that are realistically achievable. Because 50% already absolutely wasn't by 2030, let's be honest.
Okay. How much carbon is there in the atmosphere, by the way? Only 420 parts per million in the atmosphere. Okay. That's not much, is it?
No, I mean, carbon does have a warming effect. It's how much of that's man-made or not, I suppose, is up to debate.
And it's all warming bad. It didn't have much of an effect in Wellington this summer, I can tell you.
No, very true. I mean, looking out the window now.
Yeah. James, do you think there is a growing movement to, and purely on financial grounds, re-examine what we're doing here?
I don't think there's as big a conversation as there needs to be, but what I would say is that there has to be an adult conversation about what costs we are realistically willing to pay. We cannot keep writing blank checks because as a country we can't afford it. Now, as you mentioned earlier, Luxon only a couple of days ago was penning this idea that his government are going to be focused on growth.
Yeah.
And at the very first hurdle they've fallen. That's the thing we need to be talking about here.